Hello and welcome to another edition of Mr. D reading the Hope Chest. So in the background today, I've got some delicious Unita biscuits. You can have them for lunch and they are with milk. Things are a lot sweeter now than they were 100 years ago. We really like to dump sugar and extra things into it. So my guess is that these Unita biscuits are probably, they're going to be very crunchy, and think of it like a Ritz cracker, but a little sweeter. So imagine if you got like a Ritz cracker and combined it with a graham cracker. That's probably about what these are going to taste like, and you could dip it in milk. So maybe you'd like that. You'd think that's yummy. Today, I've got a little reading goal, a little brain scavenger hunt for you to do while I'm reading. Violet's going to start spying for the first time, and she's going to meet a Miss Esquadrille. She's going to go back to that original room at the Hermitage from when she first got to Nashville. And I want you to really try and get a good handle on Miss Esquadrille, sort of who she is, what type of person she might be. Because remember, the author, every single person that the author takes time to introduce us to is important to help Violet sort of figure out, who she is, and they kind of the characters really give some nice places to compare with Violet, but also contrast with Violet. So, really try and get a good feel for Miss Esquadrille and who she is. All right, page 161. Chloe had thought Violet's idea of being a spy was an excellent one. And you can report to me several times a day, she said. You can come down to the Tulane, or I'll go up to the Hermitage. No, that won't work, said Violet. Everyone knows the Tulane's a Suff base, so I can't go in there with my red rose on, and I can't be seen talking to Suffs at the Hermitage. They'd agreed to meet instead at Max Bloomstein's pharmacy for lunch at noon each day, neither of them wearing Suff or anti-symbols. Violet thought it sounded exciting and spy-like, like something from the movies. Going back to the Hermitage was less exciting. The 9th floor of the Hermitage was somehow hotter than she remembered. When she turned the key and opened the door to room 907, she saw the clothesline full of Nanking bloomers had been taken down, and their occupant was in possession of the room. "Oh," said the woman, startled. "I beg your pardon," said Violet. "I'm Miss Violet Mayhew. They, gave me the other bed." "Oh." The woman's mouth was shaped like an O. Maybe it was the easiest sound for her to make. She was stout, and not much taller than Violet, and about 30 years old. She had brass-colored hair piled up under a spreading pink hat and round, startled blue eyes. She was wearing a flouncy pink dress that Violet would have considered too babyish for herself. "I'm Miss Anisette Esquadrille," she said. "I was just getting ready for the thing tonight." She nodded at the bedside table, and Violet saw that the electric curling iron was now plugged in. How anyone could want more heat on a day like this, she couldn't imagine. Well, she might as well get right to the spying. "What thing?" she asked, sitting down on her bed. "I mean, I know there's a thing, but I forgot." Miss Esquadrille untied the ribbons that held on her hat and began unpinning her hair. "I don't know, something at the Capitol. Miss Charlotte Rowe is going to speak. Have you met her?" "Yes," said Violet. "I met her at the train station." "She's so clever," said Miss Esquadrille. "And Miss Josephine Anderson Pearson will be there, and Senator Candler, of course, and Mrs. James S. Pinkard, and some Suffs, too, I suppose. Are they going to vote on the amendment?" said Violet. "I don't think so," said Miss Esquadrille, opening the metal clamp on her hair curler, rolling a lock of brass-colored hair around it, and snapping the curler shut. "I don't really understand all that part of it. It's just some sort of meeting. There'll be speeches." A dreadful smell of burned hair filled the room. "Do you want to use this next?" Miss Esquadrille asked. "No, thank you," said Violet, who couldn't imagine putting hot metal next to her face in this heat. Besides, her hair wouldn't hold a curl anyway. She wondered if Miss Esquadrille would mind if she turned the fan on. "I just think that we all need to look really nice," said Miss Esquadrille, looking at Violet's plaid dress with the horrible patent leather belt. "Because the Suffs are going to look like frumpy, man-hating witches." Violet felt moved to retort that at least the Suffs didn't wear flouncy pink dresses better suited to a 4-year-old, but she remembered that she was supposed to be an anti and kept her mouth shut. "I was on duty at the telegraph offices all morning," said Miss Esquadrille. "Every time a Suff goes in to send a message, I look at the desk after she sent it and see if I can read the impressions the pen has left on the blotter." She shrugged and reached for another strand of hair. "Then, whenever a messenger boy heads out with a telegram, I try to catch him before he gets on his bike to bribe him to show me the message. But I can't catch them," she shrugged again. "They move so fast." "Would they really show you the telegrams for money?" Violet asked, surprised. "Supposed to," said Miss Esquadrille. "And then, if it's addressed to a Suff and you don't want them to get it, they're supposed to give you the telegram for more money." Miss Escudrill was either the stupidest adult Violet had ever met, or just didn't know what supposed to meant, Violet thought. Don't you have another dress you could wear? Said Miss Escudrill. Violet unwrapped her bundle and showed Miss Escudrill the other dress that had been cut down for her in Washington. It was a brown and black houndstooth check and looked as if it were meant to subdue whoever wore it into a deep, prolonged state of melancholy. Huh, said Miss Escudrill. That won't do. Makes you look like a Suff or a Bolshevik. I'll see if we can round up something better. I'm sure Miss Pinkard can find something, or buy it if she has to. We have plenty of money. Why do we have plenty of money? Violet asked. She had been wondering this since their meeting last night. Because of the generosity and true chivalry of Southern men, said Miss Escudrill blithely. They don't ever want women to have to vote. They know that Southern women were meant to be the queens of their households, so voting would be demeaning to us. Violet took this to mean that Miss Escudrill didn't know where the money was coming from. But, Miss Escudrill, you're not even married, she said, so how can you be the queen of a household? To Violet's dismay, Miss Escudrill's eyes filled up with tears. What a horrible, cruel, nasty thing to say to a person! She sat down on her bed, which creaked alarmingly, and buried her face in her hands, sobbing. Violet dived for the curling iron, which had fallen on the rug. She missed the wooden handle and grabbed the business end instead, burning her fingers painfully. She unplugged the curling iron from the wall socket. I'm sorry, Miss Escudrill, she apologized. I beg your pardon. Horrible. Not my fault. Not married, Miss Escudrill sobbed. I'm really, really sorry. I didn't mean it that way. How would you like it to get to be my age and not even married? Miss Escudrill was getting more and more out of breath between sobs, and Violet wondered if she might be becoming hysterical. In books, when people got hysterical, you slapped them in the face. Violet didn't think she'd do that. Instead, she sat down on her bed and went on apologizing every time Mrs. Escudrill stopped sobbing long enough to hear her. In between apologies, she sucked her burned fingers. She thought about the hatchet-faced woman in the train station in Chattanooga, waiting for her son's body to arrive from France. She was Southern, that woman, but she hadn't looked like the queen of anything. This spying was a lot less fun than Violet had thought it would be. She wished Myrtle was there. So did you kind of get a feel for Miss Escudrill? We're going to see her kind of in and out and throughout the rest of the book. So kind of be thinking about, compare her versus some of the anti-suffrage or some of the suffragists that we've met. Just interesting kind of food for thought. Chapter 14, Max Bloomstein's Pharmacy. Mr. Martin hadn't said anything about how long they were staying in Dead Horse Alley or where they were going afterwards. Myrtle supposed that, like everyone else, they were waiting. They had been there for 2 days already, but Mrs. Reddy had told them that no one was sure when the legislature would vote. Myrtle didn't know what they would do after the legislature voted. She had no plans. She didn't want to go back to the Girls Training Institute, and she didn't want to stay in Tennessee, but she wasn't really sure what other choices she had. None, it seemed like. Myrtle would have liked to have gone and found Violet. It would have been fun to go exploring together, but she had seen enough of Tennessee to know by now that was impossible. Mrs. Reddy had gone out to deliver some of the sewing she did for a living and then visit her daughter. This was a relief. Myrtle felt she could have gotten along fine with Mrs. Reddy if it wasn't for Mr. Martin, but Mr. Martin made the whole situation very uncomfortable. Mrs. Reddy was always casting suspicious looks at him, trying to figure out what he was hiding from and why he was missing 3 fingers and why he had Myrtle with him. Myrtle had been trying to keep Mr. Martin inside and out of sight. He didn't seem to be taking the fact that he was a wanted man very seriously, and Myrtle felt somebody had to. She had gone out for newspapers to keep him busy and for groceries, sardines and peaches and Unita biscuits. Unita biscuits, delicious with lunch. But now Mr. Martin seemed determined to go out. He announced that he had to go and talk to people to see if there was any news. Myrtle didn't see any way she could actually forbid him to leave, and she privately suspected which person in particular he wanted to see. Myrtle could see that the problem of Mr. Martin's future needed to be settled nearly as much as hers did. Miss Chloe sure is pretty, she commented. Uh-huh, said Mr. Martin, crawling under the bed to look for his socks. You should tell her that you love her. There was a loud metallic clang from under the bed, and Mr. Martin emerged, rubbing his head. Myrtle, that's crazy talk. Be quiet. You should get married, Myrtle suggested. I'm a fugitive, said Mr. Martin, smiling thinly. Do you know what a fugitive is, Myrtle? Of course, said Myrtle. So do your time, and then marry her. My time is likely to be 20 years in Fort Leavenworth, said Mr. Martin, tying his shoes with unnecessary vigor, unless they deport me, which would be if I was lucky. Myrtle frowned. 20 years was a lot. Alrighty, thank you for listening.